And as the President wraps his news conference on this day 8 of the government shutdown, we will take you live now to the House floor. They're gaveling in to take up a couple of bills, including the rule for a bill that would establish a bicameral, bipartisan working group, a so-called super committee on the fiscal matters on the government shutdown. Live coverage here on C-SPAN.
Appropriations for the salaries and related expenses of certain federal employees during a lapse in funding authority for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 3273 to establish a bicameral working group on deficit reduction and economic growth, and providing for consideration of the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 90, making continuing appropriations for the Federal Aviation Administration for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar, ordered printed. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 373 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 373. Resolved that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 89, making appropriations for the salaries and related expenses of certain federal employees during a lapse in funding authority for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the joint resolution are waived. The joint resolution shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the joint resolution are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the joint resolution and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 40 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations, and 2, one motion to recommit. Section 2. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 3273, to establish a bicameral working group on deficit reduction and economic growth. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 40 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Rules, and 2, one motion to recommit. Section 3A. In the engrossment of H.J.Res 89, the clerk shall 1. Add the text of H.R. 3273 as passed by the House as new matter at the end of House Joint Resolution 89. 2. Conform the title of House Joint Resolution 89 to reflect the addition of the text of H.R. 3273 as passed by the House to the engrossment. 3. Assign appropriate designations to provisions within the engrossment. And 4. Conform cross-references and provisions for short titles within the engrossment. B. Upon the addition of the text of H.R. 3273 as passed by the House to the engrossment of House Joint Resolution 89, H.R. 3273 shall be laid upon the table. Section 4. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 90, making continuing appropriations for the Federal Aviation Administration for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the joint resolution are waived. The joint resolution shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the joint resolution are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the joint resolution and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 40 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations, and 2, one motion to recommit.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. For the purpose of the debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman, my colleague from Worcester, Massachusetts, my friend, Mr. McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
For consideration of this resolution, all times yield for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
House Resolution 373 provides for closed rule for consideration of H.R. 3273, the Deficit Reduction and Economic Growth Working Group Act of 2013. H.J.Res 89, the Federal Worker Pay Fairness Act of 2013, and H.J.Res 90, the Flight Safety Act of 2013. Mr. Speaker, today this body will consider three important pieces of legislation designed to address the current government shutdown and the looming debt limit. The first of these three bills would appropriate the funds necessary to pay essential federal employees who have been continuing to work during the shutdown. These men and women have earned their paychecks and deserve for us to act on legislation to ensure that they are paid on time. Secondly, we will consider legislation to fully fund the FAA in order to ensure that our nation's commerce and air travel continues uninterrupted and safely. There are many, many workers of the FAA who need to come back to work to ensure the safety and to ensure that millions of American passengers in the air are not put at risk due to a continued government shutdown. Finally, we will consider legislation to establish a bicameral, bipartisan working group on deficit reduction and economic growth. This working group would consist of 10 members of the House and 10 members of the Senate, representing 6 by the majority and the 4 for the minority of each chamber. These members would be appointed no less than 1 day after enactment of this legislation and would each meet on the subsequent calendar day until an agreement is reached on the overall discretionary levels for fiscal year 2014, changes to the discretionary debt limit, and reforms to direct spending programs. For nearly a month now, Mr. Speaker, House Republicans have asked the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, and Senate Democrats to sit down and to negotiate with House Republicans. Bill after bill from House Republicans and this body have gone to the United States Senate only to be batted down or to be revised to come back without addressing the significant problems that our country faces today. So, what we're trying to do is to find another avenue, and that is to have the House of Representatives and the United States Senate and their appointees to be able to meet together in a working group to resolve these issues. What do I envision? I envision a TV would be in the room. The American people could take part in these discussions and see how much progress can be made between House, Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats and House Republicans and House Democrats on these important issues, and hold those members accountable for exactly the same thing that we're trying to do, and that is to get this government back open up with an agreement about how we're going to fund this government. So today we ask once again if the Senate is willing to not only join us as we work towards ending this government shutdown, but how we're going to address our government's debt and putting our nation back to work on the pathway to prosperity. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and yes on the legislation. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, my good friend, Mr. Sessions, for granting me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for as much time as he wishes to use.
Mr. Speaker, my Republican friends are devolving into self-parody. The solution to this unnecessary and manufactured crisis is simple, and it hasn't changed for months. Step one, pass a clean, short-term continuing resolution at Republican sequester levels to reopen the government. Step two, pass a clean debt ceiling bill so that the United States will not default for the first time in history, and so we don't send the economy into a tailspin. Step three, finally agree to go to conference on the budget so we can sit down and talk about our priorities. Now let me go over that once more just in case there's any confusion on the other side of the aisle. Reopen the government, raise the debt ceiling, and negotiate on the budget. That has been what the White House and Democrats in Congress have been asking for over and over and over and over again. It's what we're asking for today, and it's what we will ask for tomorrow. By contrast, the list of House Republican demands changes every 10 minutes. Repeal Obamacare, defund Obamacare, delay Obamacare, stage a non-filibuster filibuster. Ask for the entire Romney economic platform in order to raise the debt ceiling. Yell at park rangers. Fund this part of the government, fund that part of the government, pay furloughed employees, pay essential employees, hold a conference meeting, hold the press conference, rinse and repeat. Enough, Mr. Speaker, enough. So here we are again with yet another convoluted, cockamamie legislative effort that is going absolutely nowhere. Yet another, quote, message bill that is designed to win today's news cycle, but that gets us no closer to resolving this crisis. Today's effort is particularly pathetic, Mr. Speaker. Instead of actually solving the problem and letting the American people get on with their lives, the bill before us today would create that most cherished and beloved Washington institution, a committee. But not just any committee, no, another super committee. It's Super Committee 2, the Wrath of Cruz. We have before us a bill that was dreamed up Lord knows when, floated in the press at 10 o'clock this morning, distributed as legislative language at 11:30 this morning, in the Rules Committee at 12:30, and on the floor at 3:20. Forget the 3-day rule, Mr. Speaker. This contraption barely even followed the 3-hour rule. And the super-duper committee part 2, or pardon me, the Bicameral Working Group on Deficit Reduction and Economic Growth, that is created by this bill, doesn't come with any instructions. There's no timeline. There is no deadline. It doesn't reopen the government. It doesn't prevent a default. It doesn't do much of anything. So it's unclear whether coffee and pastries will be provided to the super-duper committee part 2 working group. Maybe we need another bill to do that. This is just another press release. Mr. Speaker, we do not need another committee to do the job that we were elected to do. And let me remind my colleagues, we have this thing called the Budget Committee. And the Republicans made a big deal about the fact that we passed a budget in the House and the Senate didn't pass a budget in the Senate. Well, then the Senate did pass a budget. And what you're supposed to do is then go to conference and work out your differences and come up with a final product. For 6 months, we have been pleading with the Speaker of the House and the Republican leadership to appoint conferees to negotiate a budget agreement. To negotiate a budget agreement. That's the way it's supposed to work. The Senate does something, we do something, we negotiate the differences. For 6 months, the Republicans have refused to appoint conferees, and now they're saying we need this kind of vague committee that has no instructions and that has no timeline. It doesn't do anything to stop the government shutdown. It doesn't do anything to stop the government default on our financial obligations. This is no way to run a railroad, let alone the United States House of Representatives. So I would urge the Republican leadership to start caring a little less about winning today's news cycle and a little more about the American people who sent us here and who expect us to do our jobs. Open the government, raise the debt ceiling, negotiate on the budget. It is really not that complicated. In the meantime, I would urge all of my colleagues to reject this closed rule, reject the underlying legislation, and reject the politics of manufactured crisis. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves his time. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. You know, hot off the press at this afternoon from Politico, which is not exactly a right-wing newspaper, says Obama, meaning President Obama, Obama calls Boehner, reiterates he won't negotiate. So the President evidently today, as reported by Politico, called Mr. Boehner to repeat, I'm not going to negotiate on bills to reopen the government or to raise the debt ceiling. That's what's being reported. Mr. Speaker, this is, I think, a bad precedent. You know, where I'm from in Dallas, Texas, leaders lead. Leaders lead by trying to do what's in the best interest of everybody, not run into crisis after crisis after crisis, not negotiate, not agree to meet with people, not agree to do things to help resolution. Leaders present ideas, opportunities, options. They're the ones that stay at the table, and they're the last ones to leave when everybody else gets frustrated. And I think what's important to note is this president is simply different than every other president we've ever had. And what he is doing is giving up not only his legitimate moral authority to lead, but what he's doing is saying, I recognize what could happen if we're unsuccessful, and I think, as Speaker Boehner said yesterday, the President's senior advisor said he would sooner see the government go into default than to meet with and negotiate with the Republicans. That is not what leaders should be doing, and I would suggest to you that this President stands on the shoulders of other presidents for 230-plus years who have given their very best to the benefit of others. They have looked at Republicans, they have looked at Democrats, they've looked at House members, they've looked at Senate members and realized they had to negotiate. It's one of the key things I remember as a young man about Ronald Reagan negotiating with Tip O'Neill, inviting Tip O'Neill down to the White House, them being good with each other, talking about how they could make progress with each other. Well, we're evidently past that. This President even calls the Speaker, the audacity to call the Speaker and says, I'm not going to negotiate with you. That is not good leadership, and the American people are seeing this. So, the House of Representatives, we're not going to get our nose out of joint. We're going to stay at work. And it is true. We bring this bill up, and we'll probably be here tomorrow and the next day with new ways to negotiate. Today, we're here on the floor just as we were yesterday, just as we were on Saturday, talking about constructive, creative, bipartisan issues to fund this government and to make sure we can get moving. NIH should have been open already. We should have had lots of government agencies as a result of what we're doing, including the Head Start. We should have these activities, even if it's one by one, to open up. And today, we're on the floor to say we ought to pay those government employees who have been working when Tuesday rolls around, and they should get paid. We should have people at the FAA come back to work and open that agency back up. That's what House Republicans are doing. We recognize this President will not negotiate, but we're going to offer ourselves up. I think the American people see what House Republicans are attempting to do. I'm very proud of not only what our Speaker is doing, but our Majority Leader Eric Cantor and our Whip Kevin McCarthy. They are attempting to move forward ideas that will sustain not only this body to where we look people straight in the eye, but where we can accomplish things on behalf of the American people. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Speaker, we're in this predicament because the Republicans shut the government down. It is that simple. You own this shutdown, whether you like it or not. And the gentleman quoted Politico. Let me read from Politico. It says, President Barack Obama opened the door to a short-term debt ceiling increase in order to avoid going over the fiscal cliff and allow negotiations between the White House and Congress on a long-term deal. That doesn't sound like someone doesn't want to negotiate. No, I prefer a long-term deal because I'm tired of this crisis by crisis by crisis. But this President has gone out of his way to negotiate over and over and over again. I'll just point out another thing for my colleagues. You know, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and Speaker Boehner negotiated a deal on this short-term continuing resolution to keep the government going. Speaker Boehner admitted that on This Week with George Stephanopoulos on Sunday. They negotiated a short-term spending deal to keep the government open at the Republican sequester levels. And the deal was that in return for the Republican numbers, the Speaker wouldn't attach any extraneous materials to that short-term continuing resolution. Obviously, that is a deal that the Speaker did not keep, in large part because of a group in his conference who kind of represent, I guess, the Ted Cruz wing of the party, who said that wasn't enough. They wanted to shut the government down, and they're willing to default on paying our bills for the first time in history. For the first time in history, that is, in my opinion, unconscionable. So let's not talk about who wants to negotiate here. Democrats have negotiated on going to your level on the short-term continuing resolution. The President has been willing to negotiate time and time again. Every time he gets close to an agreement, the Speaker can't deliver. So, I mean, he's going to continue to try, but don't say he's not trying to negotiate. At this time, I'd like to yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Rules, Ms. Slaughter.
The gentlelady will suspend. Members are advised to address all comments to the chair and not to others in the second person. The gentlelady from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly thank my friend for yielding me this time. It's really getting more and more difficult for us to get out here and act as though we're really having a serious debate about something, and I want to just start off by saying that I don't want anybody in the country to forget, as they're trying to do things with the federal government that's shut down, as the VA service centers did. Their phones are now inoperative. And as we've all learned to our great dismay, the deceased soldiers, their families have not been able to be compensated in any way to make it possible for them to pay for funerals or even go to them. I'm sure that will be partially something we're going to come up and deal with, as they're doing with this part-time let's build ourselves a new government. Don't forget, this was about health care. That's all there is to it. Service people can't get the benefits that they need. Nobody can get anything from the government. Mortgages are on hold because Republicans didn't like health care. Now, if you would ask them, why in the world do you object to 30 million Americans who have not been able to afford health insurance having an opportunity to get it, they don't give you any answer. There's more obfuscation. And if we talk about negotiations, let me tell you the negotiation that's really critical is not taking place at all. We're doing an example of that right now. There's no negotiation in the committee process. The only committees that have been putting anything up to the floor of the House has been the Rules Committee. Somebody writes a bill in the afternoon, and even that evening or early the next day, the Rules Committee goes in, it goes right to the floor. There is no amendment chance, there's no discussion chance. We don't know what they're doing. The discussion and the amendments and the negotiation, yes, that's supposed to go on between the two parties in the committees is nowhere to be seen and hasn't been for ages. Now, we've been down this road before, again, with the super committee idea, which was such a glaring disaster and only ended up in a sequestration. The whole idea of sequestration was so awful that none of us ever thought we'd get there, but now we are pretending that that's what it is, and let's have another super committee. I will tell you that was so awful, and it set us back so much in this country, not only scientific research and national security, public safety being compromised, but now they want to do it again. I think it's just another delaying tactic because I'm persuaded today, as I stand here, that the Republican Party in this House does not want to open the government. The opportunities they've had over and over again have been absolutely quashed. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk in the media about, oh, if only I had a chance to vote for a clear resolution I would do it in just a moment. Well, let me tell you that it's been turned down twice before on the House of Representatives on the rule. When we got to the part about the previous question, we had always said just vote no, and you will then have your opportunity to vote on the clean bill from the Senate, which is already passed there, would go directly to the President. We never got a single Republican vote. Draw your own conclusions about the 25 Republicans who said that, oh, if only they were given that opportunity. Now, the sequestration, as my colleague has pointed out, we accepted that as part of a deal on our behalf between Speaker Boehner and Senator Reid. As awful as it is, and most of us did not like that, nonetheless, for the short-term CR, we were willing to take it. But now the majority, again, refuses to let us vote on the CR which was agreed on. This irresponsible governance has continued in the days since the majority shut the government down. And over this last week, and last several weeks actually, the majority has abandoned any semblance of regular order and just turned the Rules Committee, as I've said, into the Committee of Jurisdiction. Now, where does all this come from? I think most Americans were surprised. I know, let me express my concern, even though I recall that just after Senator Obama was elected president in 2008, that we all heard about the great dinner that took place on inaugural night, declaring among Republicans and elected officials that they would not allow Senator Obama, now President Obama, to get anything done. Well, we thought after 4 years maybe that was over with, and we did get the health care passed. Now we learned on Sunday morning that that is taking place again, which again says, you know, I'm not sure that this party could put the government back into business or not, because they would have to get the permission, apparently, from the Heritage Foundation Action for America, from former Attorney General Edmund Meese and David Koch, because they wanted to repeal the Affordable Health Care, and they engineered this whole thing. That appeared on Sunday. This is Tuesday. Not a single refutation has taken place. May I have an additional 30 seconds?
I yield the general an additional 1 minute.
So it's time for this game to come to an end, but it won't, because it's not part of the plan. And I'm really tired on behalf of the American people to watch them being fooled, and I think that we are more than disgusted and tired with the process by which this legislation comes to us, and the four of us on the Rules Committee are calling for you to open up this process so that the other members of our party, as well as yours, I'm confident know nothing more about these bills than we do, have an opportunity to really do our jobs as we were sent here to do. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from New York yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I appreciate the comments of the gentlewoman, the ranking member of the committee. We had, just before we came down the floor, had a very, very nice committee meeting where she was able to not only articulate that, but was joined by her other colleagues. And I did offer words of assurance to them about not only how we need to move forward, but also how the committee needed to get slightly better in our time frames, and we're going to attempt to do that. And the gentlewoman recognizes that what we're doing is bringing bills as quickly as we can, including the FAA, opening up the FAA again, and how important that is. And so she recognized the importance of what we're attempting to do. Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, gentleman from the Budget Committee, Mr. Rice.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, can we talk? The government is partially shut down. The nation's debt ceiling is looming. President Obama and Harry Reid have drawn a hard line. They proclaim over and over, no negotiation. They insist the debt limit must be raised at current levels of spending. No negotiation. They're adamant that the status quo must be preserved. And why not? Well, here's the status quo. 7.3% unemployment 4 years after the recession's ended. 15% unemployment for those under 25. 50% of recent college graduates unemployed or underemployed. Household income down 10% in the last 5 years. It's fallen every year since the president's been in office, and it continues to decline. Continued economic stagnation 4 years after the recession's ended. Continued record deficit spending. Social Security and Medicare on a path to insolvency. Why would the Republicans want to discuss these fundamental problems? Why would we want to alter that course? By any measure, the President's policies are failing miserably. He's failing our seniors. Their safety nets, Social Security and Medicare, are headed for bankruptcy, but he won't negotiate. He's failing our middle class through higher taxes, higher energy costs, higher insurance bills on one hand, and on the other hand, continued decline in household income. They're getting squeezed from both sides, but he won't negotiate. He's failing our youth, the millennial generation, by piling mountains of debt on our children and our grandchildren, but he won't negotiate. He's failing our youth and millennial generation through his job-killing policies of more regulation, more taxes, and more government. Mr. President, our youth want to work, and they're counting on us, but the President won't negotiate. Remember, my friends, the Democrats held the House, the Senate, and the presidency for only 2 years. But out of that came Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, the two biggest expansions of government and killers of jobs to come out of Washington in 50 years. I didn't want the government to shut down. Nobody did. But we cannot continue to run headlong into failure. If we're to change course, the Republicans can't do it on their own. The President and Harry Reid in the Senate will have to participate. Mr. Reid, we're asking once again for a conference. Mr. President, it's way past time to soften your hard-line stance on no negotiation.
Members are reminded again to make all comments to the chair and not address someone else in the second person. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to the gentleman from South Carolina who just spoke, I don't know what he's talking about. The bottom line is that we have been negotiating. This temporary spending measure that we're talking about, Harry Reid negotiated it with Speaker Boehner. It's at your levels, your sequester levels. You think I like that? I can't stand it. But I don't want to shut the government down. The bottom line was the Speaker said that in exchange for that, there would be no extraneous materials attached to that CR. He wasn't able to deliver on his promise because of some people in your conference. It's that simple. We have tried, the gentleman was on the Budget Committee. I would think that being on the Budget Committee, you would want to go to conference. You worked on a budget, the Senate worked on a budget, you would want to go to conference and work out those spending differences. We have tried 19 times to get you to go to conference, and you refused to negotiate with the Senate on each of those occasions. Every time the President negotiates, unfortunately your leadership can't deliver on the deal. So we have been negotiating, we still want to negotiate. But please, as the gentleman gave no reason why we should shut down this government, why the Republicans should have shut down this government, and he's given no reason why we should default on our financial obligations. We ought to pass a short-term spending bill to reopen the government, and we ought to pass a clean debt ceiling bill so we don't default on our financial obligations and ruin our economy. At this point, Mr. Speaker, I am proud to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, the Democratic leader, Ms. Pelosi.
The gentlelady will suspend. The chair would remind all members of the essential rule of decorum in the House. Under Clause 1, Rule 17, members are to direct their comments to the chair, not to other members in the second person. Directing remarks through the chair helps to reduce personal confrontation between members and fosters an atmosphere of mutual and institutional respect. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I associate myself with his remarks. I thank him for his extraordinary leadership on trying to keep government open. Mr. Speaker, this is what, the 8th day of the Republican shutdown of government. Small businesses cannot get loans to expand. Veterans have some uncertainty about their benefits, tuition assistance, and the rest. Millions of women and children will go without nutrition programs they so desperately need. The shutdown could be over in hours if Republicans would stop being the party of no and just take yes for an answer. So in case you don't know, I have some very good news for you. Democrats have not only been willing to negotiate, Democrats have already stated that they are ready to cooperate. Cooperate. For example, I have good news. Perhaps you missed the fact that the 200 members, Democratic members of the House, have signed a letter saying that they're willing to accept the Republican number of 986, even though, as the gentleman said, we don't like this number. We don't think it's adequate. But the fact is, we don't like shutting down government more. So in order to open up government, 200 members have signed the letter, and 5 additional members have made public statements of their willingness to support the Republican number. There's space in this letter for the signatures of some maybe just 17 Republicans to sign, but they don't have to sign the letter. Many of them have made public statements which we respect and honor as their public statement that they would vote for the Republican number of 286. This wasn't you negotiated. The Speaker negotiated with Senator Reid. Senator Reid accepted the Republican House number. The President of the United States accepted the Republican House number. The Democrats in the House accepted the Republican House number. The only people not accepting the Republican House number are the Republicans in the House. So when the leadership of the Republican Party, Speaker Boehner in particular, go around saying it can't pass, the votes are not there, does that mean he does not trust the word of his own members who have said that they will vote for the 986? Let's find out. Let's bring the bill to the floor. As that's what we're saying, just bring it to the floor. It's passed the Senate. The President stands ready to sign a number we don't like, but prefer over shutting down government. That is where we don't like it. We want to open the doors of government, and we're willing to use the key of the Republican number to do so. Last week, Democrats went a step further. In both public and private discussions, Speaker Boehner said that he doesn't want to go to conference on the budget, even though he asked for regular order in March. In March, early March, Senator McConnell and Speaker Boehner said they wanted regular order. That's a message to the President that Congress should work its will. That was good news to us. That means you pass a bill in the House, you pass a bill in the Senate, you go to conference to reconcile your differences. Perhaps the Speaker didn't think that the Senate would pass a budget, but they did as a matter of days, practically hours, after the House passed its budget. But what happened to regular order? It flew out the window. After saying we want regular order, no longer do the Republicans want to take yes for an answer. And why? Well, some of this is explained under the Speaker's own statement. Speaker Boehner said, under rules, listen to that word, rules. Under rules, if you appoint conferees and after 20 legislative days there's no agreement, the minority has the right to offer motions to instruct, which become politically motivated bombs to throw up on the House floor. So to be frank with you, we're following what I would describe as regular order. What I would describe as regular order is not under rules. Under rules are the rules of the House. The Speaker, awesome as the power of the Speaker is, and I understand that, do not have the power to just decide what regular order is. And if you don't want to honor regular order, just say you're not going to honor it, but don't redefine it in order to keep government shut down. So, listening to the Speaker, not wanting to shut government down, wanting to, at first, and then after it was shut down, wanting to open it, the House Democrats took a step unprecedented by any minority party in the Congress of the United States. The House Democratic minority said, we will surrender, we will relinquish our right to motions to recommit, motions to instruct, an insider term, actually placing conditions on how we go to the conference table. So he said to the Speaker, don't worry about that. If that's important to you, if you want to shut down government because you're afraid of a motion to instruct, we'll allay your fears. Fear no more, Mr. Speaker. We will not offer these motions. And as an example, we didn't offer the motion on the first night, which was our right to do when this bill was introduced, as all of you will agree was. So we have said, we have made that claim. This is, as I said, unprecedented, but is a necessary move to end the Tea Party stranglehold on our government and restore basic services on which millions of people rely. Didn't take yes for an answer. 200 signatures, and I wish, with unanimous consent, to submit this letter for the record.
Without objection.
200 signatures. It's a beautiful sight, because I want to tell you something. It's about cooperation. None of us likes this number. All of us want to open up government. That's why we signed it. And I want to thank Congressman Tim Bishop and Congressman Patrick Murphy and Congressman Keith Ellison for producing this result. Let's put that there. So, We've said yes to we're giving you the votes on something we don't like. We've said we won't do motions to instruct. Please take yes for an answer. If you insist on being the party of no, then don't hide behind something and saying who won't negotiate. We cooperated. We gave you what you wanted. And now here we are today. Republicans are offering yet another motion to keep government shut down. Some people call it in the press the super committee. Others call it the Ted Cruz committee. Whatever you call it, I'd like to know who writes this stuff. This is so ridiculous a proposal. So ridiculous a proposal. How about we go to the budget table and see how we can reduce the deficit, produce growth for our country. But all we're going to do is cut our investments in education, investments in making the future better. We're going to make seniors suffer more while we do not touch revenue, and we will not allow any discussion of closing special interest loopholes. That's how they want us to go to the table. You must be kidding. As I said, who writes this stuff? You know, sometimes there's an expression that people use, flippantly they'll say, who do you think you are? If you say something, remember that from your childhood, somebody say, who do you think you are? I think we have to take that sentence very seriously. Who do we, with an emphasis on think, that would be interesting. Who do we think we are? Do we think that we are a party that is responsible, all of us, a Congress that is responsible, that wants to do the right thing for the American people, know that we have to come here to cooperate with each other to get something done in a bipartisan way? To my fellow colleagues on the Republican side, I hope that's allowed, Mr. Speaker. They are members of the body. Do you think you have come here? Do you think you have come here to make sure that people know that you can do this just because you're doing it? It's just a waste, a total waste of time, and we don't have time to waste. In fact, we could be spending our time in such a more important way, working in a bipartisan way on entrepreneurship, creating growth for our country, investing in the education of our people, which, by the way, brings more money to the Treasury than any other initiative you can name. Early childhood, K through 12, higher education, lifetime learning. You want to reduce the deficit? Invest in education. You want to increase the deficit? Cut education. But let's sit down and talk about that. And the path to get there is one that says, say yes to 986, we did, your number, says accept our offer, we won't offer any instruction to the committee, but don't continue to be the Tea Party of no. Mr. Speaker, I hope that the Speaker, is that allowed, Mr. Speaker? I hope the Speaker will give us a vote so we can see where this Congress stands on the serious responsibility that we have, and if the Republicans will even accept what they are asking us to accept. This rule should be voted down. This commission is a joke, whether you call it the Ted Cruz Commission or the super in what way? Certainly not super in meeting the needs of the American people. To recap, A, we're giving you 200 votes for your number. Take yes for an answer. B, the Speaker doesn't want any conditions or discussion or anything else on the floor about the budget. We're willing to accept that. Take yes for an answer. With that, I ask for a no vote on the rule and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back her time. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I want to acknowledge the minority leader for her comments today and thank her for coming to the floor. Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado Springs, gentleman of the Armed Services Committee, Congressman Lamborn.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the chairman for his work on the Rules Committee and for bringing H.J.Res 89, the Federal Workers Pay Fairness Act, and I rise in support of this act. This will ensure that federal employees who have been deemed essential will have no disruption in their pay, and that's an excellent step in the right direction, and I wholeheartedly support that concept. Just on Saturday, the House unanimously, every single Republican and every single Democrat, supported H.R. 3223. And that said that everyone who is a federal employee will get paid eventually at the end of this slowdown that we're in right now. So this is a step in the right direction, but I want to urge that we take up a bill that I have introduced yesterday, H.R. 3271, which goes a step further and says there's no distinction between the essential and non-essential federal worker. All federal workers are to be brought back immediately and given back pay and put on a regular pay schedule. We're going to be reimbursing these people for back pay sooner or later anyway. That's what the bill Saturday accomplished, that we all supported here in the House anyway. But this would reassure everyone that they can go to work immediately. There are people who are going to be having a tough time making house and car payments, and these are people with important jobs. In my district in Colorado Springs, there are a lot of defense civil workers, and they are supporting the war fighters. The Pentagon is supposed to be bringing all of them back, and many of them are coming back, but not every single one. And so I want them to have the assurance that they will get paid immediately on being reinstated, and that they will come back to work immediately. So I think that it would be in the interest of our federal workforce to take up the bill that I've introduced, 3271, and bring all civilian furloughed and federal workers back immediately with back pay. But this is a great bill. I do support it, H.J.Res 89. I thank the Rules Committee for bringing it out. There has been, unfortunately, some gamesmanship we've seen with the National Park Service. I think that that's unfortunate, shutting down the World War II Memorial when veterans are in their 80s and 90s coming to Washington, maybe for the last visit that they can, and they're being told they can't enter the memorial. So let's don't have any gamesmanship. Let's bring everyone back to work. Thank you, Mr.
Time has expired.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Texas reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Mr. Speaker, if you want to end the games, I have a better idea. Just open up the government. End the Republican shutdown. It's really simple. We could have an up or down vote to open up government today, and all the federal workers would be taken care of. All the monuments would be reopened. We wouldn't be having all this controversy. We get serious about negotiating a long-term spending bill. It's a better way. So join with us and support a clean, continuing resolution. Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, the Dean of the House, Mr. Dingell.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank my dear friend from Massachusetts. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
As I begin, I express my great affection and respect for my colleague from Texas, who is my dear friend. I think we are here to be ashamed of ourselves. We're wasting the taxpayers' time, the taxpayers' money, and we're wasting the business and the time of the House. We're taking up a bill to require that members of Congress sit down and talk about deficit reduction and raising the debt limit. The last time I checked, we didn't need a law to do that. It's already our job. And we have a conference that we could call any time between the House and the Senate, which would enable us then to get to the serious business of handling this matter under the regular order. We don't do it. I don't know why. The President says he's not going to negotiate with a gun in his head. Frankly, I wouldn't either, and I don't think anybody else in this place would. But beyond that, he also is not going to negotiate the full faith and credit of the United States, which is one of the questions at issue. So, one of the problems we seem to have with our Republican friends is that their Tea Party fringe is so ideologically hell-bent in getting their way that they're finding that they're too extreme to get it. Now we Democrats have shown a willingness to cooperate and to compromise. In fact, as the Speaker, or rather as the Minority Leader observed, we have asked Speaker Boehner to convene the budget conference all year, but to no avail. 200 Democrats, including myself, sent a letter to Speaker Boehner on Saturday saying we'd support an extension of sequester-level spending through November 15. Democrats don't want the sequester to begin with, but the interests of compromise and keeping government open says that we're going to show good faith to my Republican colleagues. And what is my Republican colleagues' response? No. Resurrect the failed super committee. They have apparently read the Peter Principle, which says when you can't think of anything else to do, appoint a committee. And they will obfuscate the matter further. Mr. Speaker, it's time to put an end to these asinine antics and maneuvering. It's time to pass the Senate continuing resolution. It's time to show the Americans and the rest of the world that a great institution created by an enormously wise group of men who made the United States Constitution is an institution that is not beyond hope of redemption, and that it can work together. We offer to work together with my Republican friends and colleagues. We hope that they will do this. I would simply observe that we are engaged here in another curious practice also. We're going to have it so that we're going to pay federal workers for doing nothing. Imagine that. My Republican colleagues over the years during my career here have always been complaining about welfare queens who would ride to the welfare office to get their pension checks. Well, here we are going to convert a bunch of federal employees to welfare queens by paying them while they do not work. The whole thing is silly, and the American people feel so.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and the distinguished Dean of the House has spoken. I gather his comments that he would not like to be appointed on the committee, and I'm disappointed. I was rather hopeful that the minority leader would see that he would be exactly the kind of common sense person that could represent the party, and so I'd hope that the gentleman would reconsider that. Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield to the Vice Chairman of the Rules Committee, the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina, for 5 minutes, Congresswoman Virginia Foxx.
Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chairman of the Rules Committee. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this rule and the underlying legislation. We've heard from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. They only need us to take up one bill. Well, what about all those bills we've sent over to the Senate, including 4 appropriations bills that the Senate won't take up to vote on? Seems to me that they ought to be doing that if they want to show some good faith effort. Today, as we have every day since October 1, the House of Representatives is taking yet another bipartisan step forward to resolve our differences with the United States Senate and reopen the federal government for the American people. Even prior to October 1, House Republicans took numerous reasonable steps toward compromise. We voted 4 times on separate proposals to fund the entire government. With each vote, we sought to lay the groundwork for bipartisan compromise. Our final 2 full funding proposals simply addressed fundamental unfairness in Obamacare. The fact that American families won't get the same year to prepare for Obamacare that the President decided to give to businesses, and the fact that members of Congress will get a subsidy to pay Obamacare premiums that the rest of America will not. Every vote from the House of Representatives has had at least some Democrat support. Not one Senate vote has been bipartisan. While we've moved to the middle, Senate Democrats still refuse to budge. They won't even send any senators to sit down and talk with House Republicans about a bipartisan solution to reopen government. One noteworthy area, though, where there seems to be great opportunity for us to move forward with our Democrat colleagues is on the matter of federal employee pay. One of this rule's underlying bills would ensure timely pay for federal employees who've continued to work through this shutdown. Those who are defending our borders, our food supply, and our capital should be paid on time. It's my hope that both sides will come together and support this rule and the underlying Federal Worker Pay Fairness Act. Mr. Speaker, we don't expect to agree on everything with our Democrat colleagues. The House appointed a team on September 30th to meet with the Senate and find common ground to fund government. When our team gathered on the morning of October 1st, no one from the Senate showed up. Every day since, the Senate has refused to be part of any discussions with the House on how to move forward. That refusal is inexcusable. That's why the House will be considering another bill today, the Deficit Reduction and Economic Growth Working Group Act, to bring Senate Democrats to the table. Once the senators have come to the table, we can start building on areas where we should have common ground and reach a solution that benefits all of the American people. But it starts with the talk. Both the rule and the underlying bills have my support, and I urge the same from my colleagues. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, let me just remind my colleagues there's an easy way to solve all of this. Reopen the government, raise the debt ceiling, and negotiate on the budget. Our minority leader has said on the floor our willingness to cooperate. It's not that complicated. It's not that complicated. You could save all this misery that federal workers are now enduring by reopening the government right now. This is not that hard to do, and it's at your number, at Republican levels. I mean, that is a compromise on our part. We loathe those sequester numbers that Republicans insisted on enshrining. Those are horrible for our economy. But to keep the government open, we're going to swallow that so we have time to work out a longer-term deal. At this point, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson-Lee.
I thank the gentleman.
Gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. I thank him for his time. And I am glad that the minority leader got on the floor of the House and spoke common sense and indicated two things. One, right now there are 200 members who would be willing to vote for a clean CR, a good bill, a clean bill that would open this House right now, and we believe a number of Republicans to make it a bipartisan vote to be able to open the government. The Republicans are playing a game of Legos. They are taking that big red box and opening it up and throwing the Legos on the ground and trying to construct a government. Well, that's a kid's game, and it's a good game. But we cannot play with the lives of the American people. Just a few minutes ago, we talked about restoring Head Start. We know that that bill is going nowhere. We know that the sequesters continuing to undermine Head Start seats across America, 57,000. In fact, it's an empty chair across America where little babies cannot go to a Head Start program. That's what the Republicans are trying to do. They're trying to tell Marlon Roses that a 3-year-old son, Hector, couldn't go to Head Start. And what is their answer? Another super committee. A committee that maybe will be playing Legos themselves, because the last super committee, and of course we respect all of our members, was not the solution to our problem. I tell you what the solution is, Mr. Speaker. It is to vote on the clean bill, open the government, let the FAA be in operation, let the Justice Department be in operation. The meeting that I just came from, 90 courts vacant, issues dealing with rape and domestic violence not being attended to, public defenders not being resourced and laid off, hundreds of lawyers not in the Department of Justice, the American Bar Association saying that there is no justice. Well, I tell you, Mr. Speaker, all we have to do is not get a super committee, but get a super commitment to America, vote for a clean bill, and vote for the debt ceiling. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. A few minutes ago we heard from one of the brightest voices of the Republican Party, member of our Republican leadership, Virginia Fox. This time I'd like to defer for 4 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, a member of the Budget Committee and the Rules Committee, the gentleman, Congressman Woodall.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 4 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my chairman for yielding me the time. I have to say I saw my chairman, Mr. Speaker, get on his feet when the gentleman from Michigan began to speak. It's not often that the Dean of the House comes down to speak, and it's a treat for me too. I've been here 2.5 years, but I've been watching the process a lot longer than that, and I do think there's a lot that we can learn from history, a lot that we can learn from well, as Chris Matthews put it on his show the other day, from when politics worked. There's no shortage of shrill voices in Washington, D.C., and when I get back home to the folks in the suburbs of Metro Atlanta, rarely do I hear somebody say, golly, Rob, I wish there were more angry people in Washington. I wish there were more folks pounding their fist and yelling and screaming, because I really think that's how solutions could be brought about. That's not how solutions are brought about anywhere. It's not how they're brought about in business. It's not how they're brought about in politics. It's not how they're brought about in kindergartens around the country. I have a chart here, Mr. Speaker. You can't see it from where you sit, but it says that as Speaker of the House, Democrat Tip O'Neill, who presided over some of the most trying times in our nation and some of the biggest deals in our nation, often in conflict with a president of a different party. While Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House, the government shut down 12 times. 12 times. And I say that, Mr. Speaker, not to say that a government shutdown is okay. It's not. I didn't want it to happen. It doesn't need to happen. I'm glad we're bringing more bills to the floor today to reopen that government. We're already more than 50% of the way there with the bills that have come to the floor. But it is happening, and it's not happening because Republican this and Republican that. I commented earlier to some of my Democratic friends what great party discipline they have displayed, never talking about a government shutdown, but always making sure it's a Republican government shutdown. And I suppose you get points for that in terms of party unity, but it's just not true, nor has it ever been true in the history of our republic, that when policy differences come about, legitimate policy differences driven by our constituents back home, that the best way forward to solve those is to make sure you demonize the other guy and make sure folks know who to blame for it. Because I tell you, in these 12 times that Democrat Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill was leading this institution, the People's House, and the government shut down, it wasn't because Tip O'Neill was a bad man. It wasn't because he lost control of some liberal faction within his party. It was because the House of Representatives, the closest voice to the American people in our republic, had legitimate policy differences with the President of the United States. And that's where we sit today. What's surprising is not that we have legitimate policy differences with the President of the United States. What's surprising is that we bring a bill to the floor to fund Head Start, and that becomes complicated. What's surprising is that we bring a bill to the floor to make sure that our men and women are getting paid, and that creates the controversy. What's surprising is we bring a bill to the floor to fund nuclear security across this country, and that's what brings controversy. There is so much that we agree on. So much that we agree on, and I am certain we're going to find the pathway forward. But I am equally certain that that pathway forward is not going to be found more quickly depending on how much we can embarrass and marginalize our political opponents. It's going to be found when we agree that there is more that unites us than divides us, and it's okay that we have some serious policy differences. I'd say to my friend from Massachusetts, for example, Mr. Speaker, as he points out that the Senate has agreed to...
Gentleman's time has expired.
I get 30...